Shalom, friends. Welcome to our special Yom HaAtzmaut Israel Independence Day edition. I'm here today with David Rubin. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
For those of you who don't know, David Rubin has been called the trusted voice of Israel. He appears as a frequent contributor and commentator on Fox News, Newsmax TV, One American News, and many other TV and radio networks. Former mayor of the town of Shiloh in the Shomron in Samaria. David started the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund and has written a number of books, including The Islamic Tsunami, Peace for Peace, and most recently Trump and the Jews, but is this week launching and releasing his newest book, which is Confronting Radicals, What America Can Learn from Israel. So, David, why did you write this book now? What inspired you to write Confronting Radicals today?
Well, basically, it was the radicals who inspired me. Sometimes we're inspired by good things happening, but sometimes we're inspired by negative things happening. And what has been happening in America for the past few decades has deeply disturbed me. And it all seemed to come to a head in the past couple of years. It actually started from the 1960s. And, in the 1960s, there was some pretty good music. But that was about the only thing that was good that came out of the 1960s. What came out of the 1960s mainly was a movement that was designed to change Judeo-Christian civilization into some sort of Marxist, secular, gender-confused, racially confused country in which the values that America grew up on have quickly been chipped away at through the years. And, so the country that used to have the 10 Commandments and in hotel lobbies and the 10 Commandments in public places now has become a country that looks down on organized religion, and it's become a country that accuses everyone of racism, that doesn't value its heritage. And I'm exaggerating a little bit because I'm only speaking about part of the country, but I want people to understand that that is what is happening in America today. And when a country starts tearing down monuments to its national heroes, when a country starts burning its flag, and things like that are very disturbing to me. And being one who grew up in America, was born and raised in America, it especially hits home. Now, since I've been living in Israel for so many years, there is that added value, which is that I look at Israel and I see Israel moving in a different direction than the United States, probably an opposite direction even. And I see so much that the United States can learn from the Israeli and the Jewish experience. And that's why I wanted to write this book, because I don't want the United States to cave into these left-wing radicals who are trying to change the country and turn it upside down into something that doesn't resemble what it once was. I want to see America learn from Israel.
Well, you've gotten great reviews of the book so far, and what you just said reminded me of what Chris Mitchell, the bureau chief from CBN News, said about your book. He said that your compelling words from Zion should be heeded, that you are addressing the political and cultural turmoil in America, and that you provide an action plan from Israel to counter the radicals and to restore American exceptionalism. So before we get to your action plan, which of course everybody wants to hear about, you said that it started sort of in the 60s, goes back to the 60s. However, you also have referred to more recent events, right? Your last book was Trump and the Jews. And so I think that even since you wrote Trump and the Jews, there's been a lot of, would you say that things have started snowballing or moving faster? How would you describe the most recent, even the last 4 months?
Well, look, the events of the Obama administration, that the Obama period, I think, really was a turning point. See, what happened was in the after the 1960s, when a lot of it was about idealism and peace and love, and but there were always these hardcore radicals in the late 60s who were really trying to bring down America. And I just heard that Ramsey Clark, famous lawyer in the United States, just passed away at the age of 93. Now, he was a communist. A lot of people don't know certain things like that. He was a communist. He served in the Johnson administration, but he was a communist. And those views are what became stronger after the 60s. And there were a lot of 60s left-wing radicals who moved into the establishment in the 70s, and people thought that they were becoming establishment figures. They were going to be part of the free market. They were going to encourage the values that made America great. But they didn't. They exploited it to make a lot of money. And if you look at the heads of Twitter and Facebook, what you see are people who really don't believe in the old tried and true American values of family and God and hard work, perseverance. Sure, they work hard, but they don't believe in the values of family and of God, and they, judging people on their character, and on their deeds, not on their face color, and not on their race, not on their ethnic background. So that those are the values that truly America proved itself as a country that could correct itself, that could improve, and that can follow through on the Jewish values of what we call tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai, that the Jewish values of creating God's kingdom on earth, creating a better world, in following through on the values that we get from the Torah, from the Bible, from the core Jewish values. And that's something that has been chipped away at over the years. And
Yeah.
I believe that in the past few years, after the Obama administration, after Obama vowed to turn everything upside down, and he truly did, and then Trump came in and tried to restore some of those Judeo-Christian values, and we saw the pushback and the rioting and all in the name of George Floyd, and countering racism and what they called systemic racism, which no longer exists in America, actually. But what does exist is a lot of racism, some towards white people, towards black people, some black people towards white people. But of course, you can't talk about black racism towards white people, because a lot of that comes from the left, and the far left has identified and defined what is acceptable speech, what is unacceptable speech, and truly all speech should be acceptable. And that's the problem. But when you had the George Floyd riots, and people were looting, and people were shutting down stores, and all of Manhattan was boarded up after the riots in Manhattan and many other American cities. and that was considered to be okay. The media didn't have a problem with that. Does the media have a problem when on January 6th, a lot of people from the right marched into the Capitol, and truly they were incited by people on the far left and the far right to do so. But the media didn't have a problem with all the other riots of the previous 2 years. So, you know, there's a game being played, which is part of a movement of the far left in America that is truly trying to create a revolution. And the word insurrection that I used in my book quite a bit, and I defined it clearly in referring to the left-wing riots of the past couple of years, and the demonstrations and the burning of government buildings and the tearing down of statues of American heroes. When I referred to all those things as an insurrection, so I think it was quite on target. But then somehow January 6th became known as the only insurrection that had ever taken place. But an insurrection is when you're trying to overthrow a country. So burning flags, tearing down monuments to American heroes, doing away with the names of American heroes on schools, on government buildings, all of that is an insurrection. It's an attempt to overthrow a country. And Israel has learned a lot from dealing with its own radicals, and I think that's something that can be shared. In fact, I'll just give you one example, Tuli, if I could. In Israel, there's a place called Har Herzl, Mount Herzl in English. Mount Herzl is the national cemetery where all of the great soldiers are buried, great statesmen are buried. It's named after Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was he's known as the father of modern Zionism, or the liberation movement of the Jewish people in our times. But he was very secular, and a lot of people disagreed with the way that he approached the building of the Jewish state. Some people said it should be more of a Jewish state and not just a state of the Jews, not just a refuge from anti-Semitism. However, no one is rioting and looting Mount Herzl or attacking the monuments at Mount Herzl, even if Herzl may have made some mistakes along the way. King David, great Jewish hero, right? Biblical hero. We read in the Bible about a lot of the mistakes that King David made. It's spoken about very openly.
Right.
But
right.
No one is bombing the stores on King David Street. Nobody is setting fires on buildings that are named after King David. Or King Solomon, whose mistakes were also spoken about quite openly in the Jewish sources. So I think that's a lesson to be learned from Israel.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, but Israelis are not pushovers. Why aren't Israelis protesting in the way that many in the far left are in America? Israel has a very strong left wing.
Oh, sure. We have a strong left wing. We have a stronger right wing, but Israel is becoming more traditional, and also that's another thing that America can learn from Israel, that the strength of the traditional family is something that should be encouraged, and that's something that Israel is moving towards and America is moving away from. So that's something that can be learned as well. No, Israelis are not pushovers. Israelis make their voices heard, but Israelis also know that it's important to recognize that mistakes are made sometimes, and that we move forward. And because we Israelis look at each other as a family, and in a family, mistakes are made, and you forgive and you move on,
Mm-hmm.
and that, or you disagree. You know, we have an expression in Hebrew, "Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim." You know, these and these are the words of the living God, and so we understand that there are differences. We respect those differences, as American universities once did, when the art of dialogue was born in American universities, in America's colleges. And now you have over 90% of the professors in American colleges are left wing, and you know, vote for the Democrats and give donations heavily to the Democrats. So I think that art of bipartisanship and that art of respecting the good in each person, what we call in Hebrew hakarata tov, I think that's something that Americans need to learn from. And so those who have a problem with George Washington owning slaves or Thomas Jefferson owning slaves, well, look at the historical context, understand that the whole world owned slaves at that time, and and look at the great American heroes for the good things that they did and the great things that they brought into the American culture.
Mhm. So you mentioned a few important lessons, and this gets to your action plan. America can learn from Israel. You mentioned the fact that Israel has strong family values. And is that something that you would say is increasing in recent years in Israel? And if so, why is that?
Well, there are a number of reasons behind it. Uh, well, let's say first of all, yes, the traditional family is extremely important. If you know, so many studies have been done. The the mother, the father, God made us a certain way, uh, and so that we could complement each other, and we can build strong families. So, uh, what people do in the privacy of their own homes, that's their business. And that's really, I would go so far as to say that's between them and God. But a society sets its standards, and Israel, like any society, has standards. And you know, the United States, once the Ten Commandments, as I mentioned, respecting your mother and father, and not stealing, and not stealing. If one were to look, and say Moses, were to look at the American cities last year when they were going into all of these department stores and through all of so many American cities and just going in and stealing. And meanwhile, the media was talking about peaceful protests. So something wasn't right there. And a society that loses respect for the values on which it was built is going to self-destruct. It's like a building without foundations. You take off the foundations, the building is going to collapse. So yeah, in the United States, strengthening the American family, strengthening the connection to God. And why is Israel stronger in those areas? Why is Israel moving towards those areas? Well, maybe it's because we are like a family. We're a small country, and we've always had those ties that bind us together. And even the secular in the population, the most secular, the most anti-religious, if you trace their roots back just 2 generations, you're going to see a population that's very connected to its roots, very connected to the Torah, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Jewish heroes. So I think that it's very important to understand that if you strengthen those values and the values of hard work, the values of family, and try to create within the media and within the educational system what the left has been doing for several decades in America, and also trying pretty hard here, then you will strengthen your country. You have to start at the grassroots, and you have to build up from there. A lot of conservatives in America thought that Donald Trump was going to come in and create a revolution, and everything was going to be, to go back to the way it was in America, where it was okay to say that you believe in the traditional family, that you believe in God, that you believe in hard work in order to get ahead, as the Jewish immigrants in America understood so well. And it's not an accident that Jews are among the most successful, probably the most successful economic group economically in America, and that's because when we came to America and there was discrimination, the Jewish way wasn't to complain about the discrimination. It wasn't to riot and to have days of rage. It was to work harder and to focus on education. And those are the Jewish values that have made Israel strong and are making Israel stronger all the time. But those also once were American values. And so I encourage people to work at the grassroots level to restore those values. And I don't think that anything is irreversible.
So in the remaining time we have left, you talk about, this extreme threat facing America. If America doesn't get its act together in confronting the radicals, what would happen?
Well, basically the country would self-destruct, be taken over by a Marxist revolution, which is already happening on a small scale, but a greatly increasing scale. At this point, if you do surveys, the surveys of the youth in America, of college-age youth, we find that an equal number of that youth have positive things to say, have as much respect for socialism as they do for capitalism. So the free market isn't even considered to be a top value anymore. So the country would self-destruct. And so as a country loses its connection with its roots, it's going to lose its raison d'etre, its reason for being. So I want to encourage Americans to strengthen their connection to their roots. And first, you have to understand what's going on. And in my book, Confronting Radicals, What America Can Learn from Israel, there is so much there that exposes the lies that the radical left has been promoting in recent years. And we had similar problems with the Palestinians. We had the Palestinians going out and calling for peaceful protest, then turning it into riots and throwing rocks and throwing Molotov cocktails. Well, these fire bombs, homemade fire bombs. Well, we've experienced that. I've experienced it personally. I've been wounded with my 3-year-old son in a terror attack when we were both shot by terrorists on the side of the road with AK-47 assault rifles. We know about the terrorism and what it does, but it always starts off as low-level terrorism, and that can't be tolerated. If you give an inch, they're going to take a mile. So I'm not going to go into the full plan that I recommend. Obviously,
you have to buy the book.
That's in the book. Yeah, we have to urge people to go and buy it and really get the full story.
Absolutely.
And truly understand what the problem is and what needs to be done.
The book is available on Amazon.com, Confronting Radicals, What America Can Learn from Israel. If we could just, we have a few minutes left, I wanted to ask about current events. Because you mentioned President Obama, you mentioned President Trump. We haven't spoken about President Biden. Are you concerned or are you encouraged? How do you feel about the new administration? How do you feel about President Biden?
Well, I'm very concerned. I see that clearly Biden, for all of the criticism of, of his mental capability at this time or cognitive loss, well, I think a lot of that is legitimate, but the actual changes that he's making, he's basically bringing in the Obama agenda. And looking at it from Israel, obviously from the social aspects, the domestic aspects in America, that's very concerning, and we've been talking about that quite a bit. But also on the foreign policy level, we see the latest attempts to whitewash the terrorism and the regional aggression of Iran, of the regime in Iran that is trying to turn back the important achievements of the Trump administration when it comes to putting a damper on the Iranian nuclear program, trying to put a halt to it and to weaken the Iranian regime. Biden is reversing all that. When we see what Trump accomplished in stopping the Palestinians from their support for terrorism, I mean, basically the Palestinian Authority is a quasi-governmental authority that was created as part of the Oslo Peace Accords in order to create peace. We know that it created terrorism. We know that the terrorism got far worse during the years that the Palestinian Authority was being given millions by the previous administrations, especially Obama. And Trump put a stop to that. He said, we are not going to give you your millions anymore until you stop giving monthly salaries to terrorists. In fact, the terrorists that killed so many Israelis, that wounded so many Israelis, including myself and my son, who was then 3 years old, those terrorists are being given monthly salaries, and quite substantial monthly salaries. And that hasn't stopped. So there's no reason why the Biden administration, no logical reason, if you really want peace, it doesn't make sense to restore $290 million in financial aid to the Palestinians. So yes, I'm very concerned about the direction that Biden and perhaps Harris are taking things. I believe they're being pushed by the hard left of their party, and they are definitely going in the wrong direction, and I'm very concerned.
And would you say that there are radicals in the Biden administration?
Would I say that there are radicals? We know that there are radicals, and I believe that that the Biden administration is being controlled by those radicals. Some of them don't have some of them have official positions, like John Kerry, but many of them don't have official positions. I think Obama is pulling the strings behind the scenes. People like Susan Rice and individuals like that are. I think they're all involved behind the scenes in making sure that that Biden goes in a certain direction, and we see that happening. And unfortunately, the left has taken control of the Democrat Party. And all you have to do is look at that debate where the topic of Antifa came up, and Biden said, "Well, Antifa is just an idea; it doesn't really exist." Well, you tell that to the police officers that have been attacked and to the government workers in those government buildings in Portland who have been attacked and set on fire in the past couple of months alone. So there's a lot to be concerned about when it comes to the radical left, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Antifa movement, and all of their associates are basically bodies that were created by the far left in order to overturn the great accomplishments that America made through the years in both correcting its faults and in spreading its freedom around the world. And that freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, those freedoms are under attack today by the censorship of the far left.
Well, anyone who's concerned about the freedom and the attacks on freedom, I encourage you to check out David Rubin's new book, Confronting Radicals, What America Can Learn from Israel, available this week on Amazon. Thank you, David, for your time, and happy Yom HaAtzmaut to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy Israel Independence Day to all of you viewers.